March 15th, 2021, 11:47 at night. That's when I learned that some kinds of evil hide behind the kindest faces. I was 82 years old, and I thought I'd seen everything this world had to offer. I was wrong. The lamplight in room 237 at Sunset Manor cast long shadows across my new reality. My daughter Sarah had picked this place herself. "It's the nicest one in town, Mom," she'd said, her voice tight with guilt and something else I couldn't name then. The room smelled like industrial disinfectant and something underneath it, something sour that made my stomach turn. I'd unpacked my few belongings earlier that day. My wedding photo with Harold, dead now 5 years. The throw blanket my granddaughter Emma had crocheted for my 75th birthday. A small stack of books I'd read 100 times but couldn't bear to leave behind. Everything fit on the little table by the window, and that's when it hit me. 82 years of living, and it all fit on a table the size of a TV tray. The aide who'd brought me to the room was a young woman named Crystal. Pretty girl, maybe 25, with honey-colored hair pulled back in a ponytail and scrubs covered in cartoon cats. She had the kind of smile that reached her eyes, the kind that made you trust her instantly. "Mrs. Patterson," she'd said, "you're going to love it here. We take real good care of our residents." She showed me how to work the call button, how to adjust the bed, where the bathroom was. Everything seemed normal. Clean, safe. That first day passed in a blur of paperwork and introductions. I met my roommate, a woman named Dolores, who'd had a stroke and could only speak in whispers. She seemed sweet enough, though her eyes held a sadness that reminded me of a dog that's been kicked too many times. Dinner was served at 5 sharp. Meatloaf that tasted like cardboard, green beans from a can, and mashed potatoes that came from a box. But I'd eaten worse during the Depression, so I didn't complain. The dining room was full of gray heads and wheelchairs, the sound of metal spoons scraping against plastic trays. Some residents stared off into space with empty eyes. Others chattered about grandchildren and weather and the good old days that felt farther away with each passing minute. After dinner, there were activities. Bingo in the recreation room, led by a volunteer with too much makeup and a voice like fingernails on a chalkboard. I won a travel-sized bottle of hand lotion and felt pathetic for being pleased about it. By 9 o'clock, most of the residents were being helped to their rooms for bed. The night shift arrived, and the whole place took on a different feeling, quieter, darker, like the building itself was holding its breath. I couldn't sleep. The mattress was too soft, and every sound echoed in the hallway outside my door. Dolores snored softly in the bed next to mine, but even that couldn't drown out the unfamiliar noises of institutional living. Somewhere down the hall, a woman was calling for her mother, "Mama, Mama, Mama," over and over, like a broken prayer. Around 11:30, I heard footsteps in the hallway, heavy boots, not the soft-soled shoes the day staff wore. I looked out my door's window and saw a man I hadn't met before, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing scrubs that were too tight across his chest. He was walking toward the room where the woman had been calling for her mother. The calling stopped. I don't know what made me get up. Maybe it was the sudden silence, or maybe it was the way the man had moved, like he was hunting something. I wrapped my robe around my shoulders and crept to the door. The hallway was dimly lit, just the emergency lighting casting everything in an eerie yellow glow. I could see the man's silhouette in the doorway of room 241, Mrs. Hendricks' room. I'd met her earlier. She was 91 with dementia, and she'd grabbed my hand at dinner and asked if I'd seen her little boy, Tommy. "He's supposed to come home from school," she'd whispered urgently. "He's only 8. Most people walk away when stories get this heavy. The fact that you're still listening, that means something. I pressed my ear to my door, straining to hear. At first there was nothing. Then I heard Mrs. Hendricks' voice, confused and frightened. "Who are you? Where's my mama?" The man's voice was low, almost gentle. "It's okay, sweetheart. Just take your medicine." "I already took my medicine. Nancy gave it to me after dinner." "This is different medicine, special medicine. It'll help you sleep." Something cold spread through my chest. I'd worked as a nurse for 43 years before I retired. I knew what evening medications looked like, and I knew the staff schedule. Nancy, the evening nurse, had left at 11. There wasn't supposed to be anyone giving out medications until the morning shift. Through my door's small window, I could see into Mrs. Hendricks' room. The man was holding something small in his hand, a syringe. Mrs. Hendricks was shaking her head, trying to push his hand away, but she was so frail, so confused. "No, no, I don't want that. I want my mama." That's when I saw Crystal appear in the doorway. Sweet Crystal with her cat scrubs and her kind smile. But she wasn't smiling now. Her face was cold, businesslike. "Just hold her arm, Marcus. She's being difficult." Marcus, so that was his name. He grabbed Mrs. Hendricks' thin arm with one hand while Crystal prepared the syringe. Mrs. Hendricks started crying, a sound like a wounded animal. "Please, I want to go home. I want my mama." Your mama's dead, honey, Marcus said, almost conversationally. Been dead for 60 years. Just like you're gonna be if you don't stop fighting us. My blood turned to ice water. I watched Crystal slide the needle into Mrs. Hendrick's arm while Marcus held her down. The old woman's struggles got weaker, then stopped altogether. Her eyes rolled back and her head fell to one side. How much did you give her? Marcus asked. Enough. Crystal checked Mrs. Hendrick's pulse, then nodded. She'll be gone in an hour, maybe 2. And her family? Son lives in California, hasn't visited in 3 years, won't even notice she's gone until the funeral home calls. They talked about it like they were discussing the weather, like Mrs. Hendricks was already a corpse instead of a living, breathing woman who just wanted her mother. Crystal pulled out a clipboard and started writing. Time of death, 12:15 a.m. Natural causes, heart failure. She looked at her watch. It's only 11:50. We'll wait. That's when I understood. This wasn't the first time. This was routine, practiced. They were murdering residents and making it look natural. Mrs. Hendricks was just tonight's victim. I backed away from the door on shaking legs. My hands were trembling so hard I could barely work my fingers. I felt like I might throw up, but I forced myself to think, to remember my training, to remember what Harold always told me. When you see something wrong, Margaret, you don't look the other way. You do something about it. I found my cell phone on the nightstand. Sarah had insisted I keep it, even though I barely knew how to use the thing. My fingers fumbled with the numbers. 911. This is 911 Emergency Services. The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional. I need to report a murder, I whispered into the phone. Ma'am, I need you to speak up. Did you say murder? Yes, at Sunset Manor Nursing Home, room 241. They're killing a patient. They just injected her with something. Ma'am, are you safe? I don't know. I'm in room 237. They don't know I saw them. Units are on their way. Stay on the line with me. Don't leave your room. The next 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. I sat on my bed, clutching the phone, listening to the dispatcher's voice and the sounds in the hallway. I heard Crystal and Marcus talking quietly, waiting for Mrs. Hendricks to die. I heard other sounds too. Footsteps, doors opening and closing. How many others were they visiting tonight? How many other families would get calls about natural deaths that weren't natural at all? Finally, I heard sirens, car doors slamming, heavy boots running down the hallway, shouts. Crystal and Marcus were arguing, their voices sharp with panic. You said no one would see. How was I supposed to know the old bat was awake? Then the police were there. I could see the flashing lights through my window, red and blue, painting the walls like some kind of warning that came too late. A female officer knocked on my door. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Rodriguez. Are you the one who called?" I opened the door with hands that still shook. "Yes, room 241. They killed her." But when we got to Mrs. Hendricks' room, she was still breathing, barely. The paramedics worked on her while the police handcuffed Crystal and Marcus. Crystal was crying, saying it was all a misunderstanding, that she was just giving prescribed medication. But they found the extra syringes, the falsified records, the bank accounts where they'd been depositing money from dead residents' Social Security checks. There are more stories I need to get off my chest. If you want to hear them, hit subscribe. I'll be here. Mrs. Hendricks lived. She was in the ICU for a week, but she pulled through. Turned out they'd been slowly poisoning her for months, small doses that mimicked the effects of aging and illness, making her sicker so her death would look natural when they finally finished the job. The investigation uncovered 17 suspicious deaths at Sunset Manor over the past 2 years. 17 families who'd buried their loved ones, never knowing they'd been murdered for their Social Security checks and whatever small valuables they'd had. 17 funerals where Crystal had probably stood in the back, wearing her cat scrubs and her sympathetic smile, watching families grieve while she counted her blood money. I testified at their trial 6 months later. Crystal got life without parole. Marcus got the death penalty. The nursing home was shut down, and the state passed new laws about monitoring medication distribution and requiring background checks for all staff. But 17 families still got justice too late. I moved to a different facility after that. A better place, with cameras in every room and strict protocols. My children thought I was being paranoid, but they hadn't seen what I'd seen. They hadn't watched evil wear a kind face and speak in gentle voices. I'm 85 now, and I still wake up some nights thinking about Mrs. Hendricks calling for her mama, about how close we all came to writing off her murder as natural causes, about how many other Mrs. Hendricks are out there right now in places where no one's watching, where no one's listening to the voices calling out in the dark. The thing about evil is that it doesn't always look like evil. Sometimes it looks like a pretty young woman in cat scrubs. Sometimes it sounds like a gentle voice offering medicine to help you sleep. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, in places where society has decided it's okay for people to die quietly and forgotten. That first night at Sunset Manor taught me something I wish I'd never had to learn. But I'm glad I was awake. I'm glad I looked through that door. I'm glad I made that phone call. Because Mrs. Hendricks lived to see her son fly in from California. She lived to hold his hand and tell him about Tommy, the little boy who never made it home from school in her memories. She lived to die peacefully in her sleep 2 years later, surrounded by family, the way it should be, the way 17 others never got the chance to do. That's worth every sleepless night I've had since. That's worth the nightmares and the fear and the weight of knowing how close evil came to winning. Because sometimes when you're 82 years old and everyone thinks you're invisible, you're the only one standing between life and death. And sometimes that's exactly where you need to be.